quickly. Settle down.
Would you please sit down?
London, May 2004. The boys' annual reunion.
Okay, here we go.
The setting is a hotel near Regent's Park.
Okay, back in action.
The boys see themselves for the first time in this newly found film, taken by a Royal Air Force cameraman in August 1945. The film was just recently discovered in the archives of the Imperial War Museum.
That is.
Where's Zigi?
That's a Vegh from Toronto. Correct. This is Krulik. This is Hammer. That's Herman. That's rats in there. That's rats over there. Correct. This is Krulik. This is Hammer.
Question I was asked by one of my delightful sons as to how it was possible for grown men to dress up in such funny penguin-like suits as we're all dressed up in tonight. I didn't know that the question would be answered for me by one of you. A letter which Sidney Finkel wrote me, it was not only a celebration of our 50 years of liberation, but even more. The evening demonstrated to me that we were here to celebrate life. We survivors who 50 years ago wore the torn clothes of our encampments, who had not showered for years at a time, were now resplendent in our fancy suits and accompanied by brilliantly attired wives in the best that the world could provide.
When we came over, they used to refer to us not as refugees, the boys who came out of the camp. And it stuck with us.
I come from a little town in Poland called Chodecz, where over 700 Jews lived, and 4 of us survived, 3 women who are now in Australia and myself.
The story of each of the 732 boys, all of them teenagers then and orphans at the end of the Second World War, is valuable in and of itself. Each who survived did so by luck, by chance. The survivors represent what would have been the great world of European Jewry, a world now vanished. The boys are a remnant. There ought to be 1 million boys, far too many for me to write a book about them. There ought to be 1 million young survivors, 1.5 million young survivors. They were murdered. These are the remnant. They are the very few, numbering worldwide probably no more than 10,000 out of 1.5 million youngsters, each of whom would have made an incredible contribution.
We'll ask you to be upstanding. We'll recite Kaddish together.
In memory of our families and the 6 million Jews murdered in the Holocaust.
This group of survivors meets annually, usually in London. Teenagers at the end of the war, most of them boys, about 80 of them girls. They remember those who died in the camps and also those who, since their liberation, have themselves passed away.
After all, we have nobody. Nobody has got nobody from the families. So we stick together. We are like brothers and sisters. We really are.
To me, England was the most loneliest place ever because I came without a language, without a trade, without money, without anything.
Going to that hell of concentration camp with such a sort of depth that we all felt that we started again alive and we shared something that no other human being has shared.
Some of them not here. Some of them I didn't recognize, they recognized me. But all in all, it was very, very emotional for me. Because at that time we had nobody. We only had each other. And we were like brothers and sisters. And that's why I feel so close to everybody here.
The final months of war, April 1945. Germany's once great war machine totters on the brink. The British, Americans and Canadians press the Germans from one side, the Russians from the other, pushing in from the east. The Allied bombing had proved enormously effective. Much of it was designed to break the German will to resist, and it was succeeding. Even as their own cities were under bombardment and their armies disintegrating, the Nazis made hasty efforts to hide the death and slave labor camps. By mid-April, Allied forces liberated concentration camps. For many of the young survivors in these camps, liberation was hardly noticed.
I remember looking out and seeing people running. And I didn't know why they were running, but my only thought was, well, how can they run? How have they got the strength to run? Because I couldn't move a muscle. I was really very ill. But I think it sort of dawned on me gradually. I knew that they were running towards the gate. And I did somehow get to know that the war was over.
We saw the troops march in, of course. We realized it was the liberation. And what did I feel? Mainly that we were going to get food. We were so hungry and thirsty that the only thing we could think about is we were going to eat.
During those closing days of war, many survivors were taken on forced marches, by foot, by train, without food and with little shelter, through the woods and the marshes and the shattered cities of Germany and Eastern Europe.
We were on this death march. We started off originally about nearly 3,000, and we ended up about just over 300. The rest died on the way or were killed or bombed or so. When we reached the Czech border, which was in a town called Chomutov, I suddenly realized that there is a world beyond. The people suddenly came out, the whole town came out, and they were showering us with fruit and bread and so on. The SS was threatening to shoot them. They fired in the air, but they wouldn't. They still came out and did it. And, well, we had tears in our eyes. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that there were people who cared.
The main destination on those final death marches was Theresienstadt, the same camp that the Nazis had portrayed as a model designed to deceive the world. By May 1945, Theresienstadt filled up with survivors, all hungry, many sick, many fearing the worst, that the SS would finish the job of murder before they could be liberated. For the youngsters among the survivors, many of them orphaned and alone, just to reach Theresienstadt alive was an accomplishment.
When I arrived in Theresienstadt, I passed out. I had probably had typhus already. I was completely exhausted. I was infected with lice. My legs were swollen. I had shrapnel wounds in my leg, and I passed out. And I found myself in the quarantine in the Hamburger Kaserne, which was one of the barracks, on the top floor, lying on a straw mattress, which was filled with people lying on straw mattresses, old people with typhus.
That first week of May 1945, battles continued in much of Czechoslovakia. Czech citizens in Prague, the Czech capital, 2 hours' drive from Theresienstadt, revolted against German rule. Prague was soon liberated by the Soviet forces, one of the last cities to be liberated in May 1945. The Czechs marched Czech collaborators with the Germans through the main streets of Prague.
The biggest shock was that we opened up our eyes and we saw that we live. Because, for instance, what I thought all the time is that I want to live 1 hour after I see the Germans being defeated, and then I don't care if I die.
You're in a daze. You don't know whether it's real or it's something else. All of a sudden, from night, it becomes the daylight. You get the daylight, and you don't know what to do with it. You're in a shock. You're in shock. You don't know whether, first of all, you know you're hungry, so you want to eat before you see, you do anything else. You're not worried about your clothing. You're not worried about anybody else. You just want to eat. Constantly, you want to eat. Food, food. You were short of food for 5.5 years. You want to eat.
May the 8th was the day of liberation. VE Day, victory in Europe. The Germans had surrendered. It was a day of joy and happiness, in London as elsewhere. The end of the war was greeted with relief and joy. In Europe, the victorious Allies faced a massive refugee problem, the greatest in history. Tens of thousands of survivors were in Theresienstadt alone. Getting adequate food and health care to them was a huge challenge.
I weighed, when I was liberated, 27 kilos. I was completely skin and bones. I had no hair. All my hair has fallen out, my eyebrows. If people spoke to me, it all went through me.
I was 18 years old and I weighed 28 kilos. So you can just, when I saw myself, I nearly fainted.
I had a high fever, I had terrible diarrhea. It was all running down my feet wherever I walked, and I couldn't make it to the toilet and so. And eventually, I was taken to a Russian hospital.
In the liberated areas, Soviet commanders decided upon a special dispensation to those who had survived the Nazi terror, the chance to do what they might to their captors.
The Russians actually gave us 24 hours that we can do anything we want, and I do mean anything we want, to the Germans.
The revenge, to my mind, was the last thing that was on my mind.
We only looked for food. We didn't care about anything else.
24 hours after being liberated, none of us killed or hit a German SS man or Gestapo, anything. None of us. And sometimes I think to myself, wait a minute, people wouldn't believe that. We've lost all our families. I lost my parents, my sisters, my cousins, everything. And here I'm liberated. For 24 hours I'm giving authority that I can do whatever I want. None of us. And many times I'm thinking myself, why? I think I come to a conclusion because the upbringing you had.
Some of the Theresienstadt orphans visited the nearby town of Leitmeritz. They saw these photographs.
We were walking through the town and we looked in the windows and we saw these pictures. We recognized ourselves. So we went and we begged with the guy to give us some pictures. And he said, of course, you know, they're valuable and I can get many things for that. Flour, sugar, tobacco, whatever. But he said, ask you, and he gave us some copies of it. And that's how we got, I've got this particular picture.
A Czech photographer, himself a partisan, had taken a number of shots of the trains transporting the youngsters and others towards Theresienstadt. For those known as the boys, the train photographs became a memento, a souvenir of the horrors of the camps and the death marches. The youngsters had few other mementos to hold on to.
At that time, I didn't know what happened. As you know, I was with my father practically to the end of the war. At that time, I didn't think what happened because we're just getting acclimatized to all our surroundings. And later, a few weeks later, when we all got a bit, we got ourselves together, then everybody started talking about our parents, our families, if anybody survived. Some of the boys went back to Poland, they came back, they couldn't find anybody. We didn't, obviously, up till now, I never found any of my family. I was the sole survivor.
The survivors had few options: to go south to Palestine, what would become Israel, to go west, if someone would let them in. But soon after liberation, another trek began, back towards their hometowns, mostly in Poland, to see who, if anybody, was alive.
People told me, don't go, the danger. I felt, you know, having been through what I've been through, I felt quite big. And I thought, nah, nothing's going to happen to me. What else can happen? But unfortunately, as soon as I reached my hometown and started walking towards my house, I was abused by the Poles.
People are neighbors, Polish neighbors, and so they don't recognize me. They don't know who I am. And I can't go over to them and I'm so-and-so and so-and-so. They live in our house. I'm afraid to say I've come back because they already live there. They might want to kill me because they killed others in other places.
They spat at me, threw stones at me, stood in the corners, laughed at me, looked, there's still a Jew alive, that sort of thing.
In July, the British people voted Prime Minister Winston Churchill out of office. King George VI turned over the reins of government. The Labour Party, headed by Clement Attlee, achieved a landslide victory. Hard-pressed Britain, some of it still in ruins after the deadly bombing, started to rebuild. The period was marked by tight financial restraints and a desire for change. Ernest Bevin became Foreign Secretary. Bevin was opposed to Jewish immigration to Palestine. At home, he feared that Jewish refugees to Britain would create competition for the British worker. The boys and many others waited in Theresienstadt. Food and medical care from the Soviets and international agencies helped restore health. The new British government, though cautious, decided to issue up to 1,000 visas for youngsters who had been made orphans by the Nazi terror.
I didn't know where England was or anything. I didn't know anything about it. All I knew that we were going to leave Theresienstadt or Prague, whatever it was, we were going to leave. Mostly, we were hoping that we were going to go to Israel.
I never had any education, so England or any other country meant nothing to me.
In fact, the first group of boys who left Theresienstadt went to Palestine. They received Palestine certificates. There was a group of Palestine certificates. And many of my boys, if I can call them that, they were the next group, but they elected to come to Britain. Of course, people were trying to leave the camps for anywhere.
We had no idea what England was like. We thought everybody's millionaires. But obviously, there are a lot of poor people before the war as there are now.
My father bought a suit. He always used to be very proud. He said, this is an excellent cloth. It comes from England. So England was, and there, of course, England won the war. And to me, coming to England was one of the most exciting things that could have happened to me.
They were going to take us to England. And they wouldn't put me on the list. So while I was sitting outside with my brother, and we were crying, and I wanted him to go to England. I didn't want him to lose a chance to go to England because of me, and he didn't want to go. He said, "We got to stick together. If we have to go back to Poland, we'll go back to Poland." The commandant, actually, a captain, a Russian captain, passed by, and he said, "Why are you crying?" And we explained to him, and he recognized us. We were with him. He was as a prisoner of war in Buchenwald. And he was in charge of Theresienstadt. So he says, "You come with me. Where is that fellow who makes out the list?" He said, "It's Mr. Finkelstein upstairs." So we went upstairs, and he said to Mr. Finkelstein, "This is his brother. I knew his father. I know his brother, and I know him. We were together in Buchenwald in Stalag 76 or 67. I cannot, remember right now." He says, "If you don't put him," it's his brother, "if you don't put him on the list, you don't go."
In the second week of August 1945, some 300 youngsters from the Theresienstadt camp were taken to Prague for a tour of the city. They had regained much of their health and posed for these photographs in Wenceslas Square in the Czech capital. On the 14th of August, British bombers flew into the airport near Prague to take the refugees from Prague to a new life in Britain. In a few cases, Russian officers tried to persuade some youngsters to stay in the communist sphere.
They were all communists, and they were brainwashing me. They wanted me to join the Communist Party, etc. And everybody, they didn't like England. They said England are traitors. They sold out Czechoslovakia.
Quite a lot of them said, "Don't go to England, stay here, we liberated you, you don't go." And they tried to convince us, or a lot of them, they tried to convince us not to go, not to leave. But no, to me, it was just going with the crowd.
That's Cookie. This is Finkelstein.
That's Finkelstein.
But this is Finkelstein. That's Ramek, that's Haspel Rosenblum, and Menachem Wachstock. That's Robin in the middle. Lord Coxmas Akozov.
The Royal Air Force planes took off for England, some at day, others late that same night. Some 300 youngsters were given a chance to forge a new life in a new country. In fact, The Labour government had been strict on its conditions for allowing the orphans into Britain. The Central British Fund, the same organisation responsible for pre-war Jewish refugees, would have to fund the boys' immigration, not the British taxpayer. They landed at Crosby and Eden Airport near Carlisle. The idea was that the refugees would be rehabilitated, would work in jobs such as agriculture that were not competitive with British workers. And after 2 years, the British government determined, they would leave. No valuable foreign currency would be spent overseas. The boys were processed into Britain. All the boys remember an extraordinary transition.
When we got there, it was very exciting. It was absolutely great. When we landed in Carlisle and we got on the buses, we were singing, happy, but we didn't know what's awaiting us. When we got to Windermere, for the first time, we got a room to ourselves. It was really fantastic. A little room, your own bed, clean sheets, everything your own.
To see the bed with white linen on it, there was something, really something.
We never knew anything like this existed.
The place was so picturesque and the people were very kind. It was just really coming out from hell and coming into paradise.
When the boys arrived in Britain, the general consensus was that they would always be, because of the terrible experiences they had been through, the flotsam and jetsam of society. They would always be the terrors, the people at the bottom of the barrel. Without exception, they proved the skeptics wrong.
Those that brought them to Britain had an idea of genius, and that was to keep them together, not to farm them out individually to families, which had often happened before the war to the immigrants from Germany, who had been very unhappy. The boys were kept together. They became their family, and this gave them a tremendous strength. It gave them a strength among themselves and a strength to face and deal with the wider world, the world of people who spoke a language which was not their native language, who had habits and customs which were, charming though they were, not their customs. And this, I think, gave them a relationship to the society which was very different to that of a lone refugee, a lone evacuee.
We're all the time together. We're all playing together. We were all laughing together. We went for walks. We went to the cinema together. It was a wonderful time for us, in a sense. It kept us away from thinking too much or brooding too much about what we're going to do and what happened to us.
For the first time, really and truly, for the first time in our life, in my life, that all of a sudden you had strangers, all of a sudden caring for you, wanting to help.
The first order of business for the boys was food. Getting enough to eat was an obsession.
One day, the first day or the second day, they bring out the plates. First of all, they had to show us how to live with a fork, a knife, and a spoon, because, you know, in the camp you had knives and forks, you didn't have that. So some of us, as they brought the plates, we put the plates on our lap, underneath the table. They came out, what happened to the plates? Where are the plates? Now it became, you know, don't worry, we got plenty of food, eat what you can. If you want, after, you know, if you want more, we got it in the kitchen.
I remember the bread they used to give us, the white, we used to call it cake, with ice cold milk, you know, straight from the farm. It was beautiful.
We got to the dining room, tables of bread and jam and butter, everything you can think of. It was really fantastic. We always, every one of us, was eating not for today, for tomorrow and the day after, because we thought we'd never get again.
I remember when we came into the dining room, And whatever they put on the table, in 5 minutes, the table was empty. Every one of us took the food under the table. We were still afraid that it will be taken away from us.
The boys wrote letters, trying to find out who from their families might still be alive. Mail delivery followed breakfast.
And every morning, you could see a scene, you could visualize it now, what it looked like. In retrospect, I can see this, how we were sitting out there on the grass, men was calling out, so-and-so, so-and-so, and so-and-so. And then you could hear, oh, my father is alive, my uncle is alive, my aunt is alive. And others were sort of looking at each other and what happened. And then you had some who would go up afterwards to this man who was calling out the post and said, is there a letter for me?
The days passed. The boys were occupied with their activities and with each other. The past receded, at least during daytime.
During the night, I think there was trauma. There were dreams, unwelcome dreams, and I certainly had them. I'm sure everybody else did.
The nightmare that I had was that I am in England, the Germans are coming, and why didn't I run away? I knew what was going on. Why didn't I run away? Why did I let myself be captured again? That was the sort of nightmare that occurred, and then I would wake and relieved it's only a dream.
Windermere provided opportunities previously unknown. There was the challenge of learning a new language. English, with its intricacies, came more easily for some than others.
English is a very difficult language because you spell it differently the way you pronounce it. In European languages, you spell it exactly as you say it. Polish or German, anything. As you say it, that's how you spell it, but not in English. Because so many different ways of spelling it, and yet you pronounce it in a funny way.
By the time I came to England in 3 months, I spoke English quite well. Mind you, I don't speak it well now, but I learned it very quickly. I was very good in languages because as a child, when I was 5 years old, I spoke 5 languages already.
This was the genius of those who brought them over, to keep them together for 3 or 4 years so that they could, as it were, have their rehabilitation as a group. By rehabilitation, mental rehabilitation, language rehabilitation, becoming literate in English, and also the physical rehabilitation, the tremendous effort made with sport and physical rehabilitation.
From Windermere, the boys spread out, always in groups. They were sent throughout the United Kingdom. A number went north to Scotland, to Edinburgh and Glasgow.
We got on very nicely with the Scottish people because they were very friendly. All the Scottish people, non-Jewish, they were very, very friendly. The girls came up to our hostel, and the people, we went to the village. Everywhere we had no trouble. Nobody called us bloody Jew or anything like that.
The boys were in places like Leeds and Manchester and Liverpool. In fact, throughout the United Kingdom. One group was in Newcastle.
The hostel I was sent to was Gateshead. Gateshead was religious, and still is. One of the religious, they called the Jerusalem of England. Why they sent me there, I don't know. I didn't think we had choice where we were going to.
Other refugees joined the first 300. They came from Poland, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia, and elsewhere in Eastern Europe. This picture is of one small group that made a way stop in France. The hostels throughout Britain were often divided according to varieties of religious worship or ideology. This group picture was taken at an agricultural kibbutz-type hostel outside London. Some hostels were Labour Zionist and socialist. There was one hostel for boys with particularly poor health. The boys established warm relations with many in the neighbourhoods where they lived.
I thought they were very kind. I thought nobody said any bad words. Nobody said you're a Jew or whatever. Nobody said you shouldn't have come here. We don't need you here. You know, we got our own things. And so, nobody. To the contrary, we met a lot of British people. I'll never forget. We have a bus conductor who came to the hostel. We stayed outside London. The hostel was called Loughton. You know, we stayed in the hostel. He took such a likeness to us. He didn't even want us to pay when we went. He knew we didn't have money or so. So he said, get in. And then he would come in the evenings and spend time with us.
As time passed, the government's idea to send the youngsters elsewhere, out of Britain, was forgotten. One of the challenges was integrating the youngsters into the workplace so they could support themselves. Finding work was always a challenge.
Well, they didn't know what to do with us because we had no education. We were too old to go to school, or you could go to further education, but as you didn't have the basics, further education wasn't much use. We were sent, majority of the girls were sent to do dressmaking. Well, I did quite well at that. At the beginning, I thought it wasn't for me, but there was no option. And I was trained in the West End of London, and it was great. I did well at that.
We had no choice. We had to learn. We had to go and find jobs. You know, as soon as the war finished, we thought the world owed us a living. But after a few weeks, we realized that nobody owes us anything. We've got to do it all ourselves.
Shortly, the centre of the boys' life became London, and in particular a club formed in this house on Belsize Park Road. It had its own dining room, a gymnasium, some sports facilities outside for volleyball, and a room where dances were held. The club's director was a pre-war German Jewish refugee, now in his mid-90s, Yogi.
We had a long discussion of how we should call the club. And somebody said, oh, we call it the Herzl Club. And I said, no. Somebody said, let's call it the Freedom Club. I said, no. Then one boy came forward and said, look, if you can't make up your mind, let us call it after our telephone exchange, which is Primrose. Let us call it Primrose Club, and then we can change it when some better turns up. The name still stuck for many, many years.
That was a sort of melting pot for the boys and girls. And we used to have dances. So, I mean, that was the thing of those days. It may sound strange today, but I mean, a dance was the thing where a boy would ask a girl, never the other way around, unless it was a lady's, excuse me. And, you know, one would get drawn into the circle.
After a discussion group, a dancing lesson. And they properly learned how to play a dance, a waltz, a tango, and things like that. And when they were dancing and had a girl in their arm, which was just one of the local Jewish girls, they had arrived.
There were outings. The boys travelled all over the United Kingdom. They went north and south. They went to the seashore and to the mountains. As the boys integrated into British society, fears concerning them receded. The boys made their way. Sport helped bring them together.
The boys became teams, whether it was football, or whether it was table tennis, or whether it was swimming, and they then competed with the society. And this very active competition, which was insisted upon by their principal teacher, who was himself a Jewish refugee from pre-war Germany and a sportsman, Yogi, a great influence on their lives, who said, compete, enter the fray, right? And they didn't therefore enter as, you know, perhaps broken individuals with nothing to contribute. They entered as a group, as a team, and became proud, therefore, when they won, as they often did, proud of being able to compete in Britain with British teams. And this made them probably more quickly British than they would otherwise have been.
The Primrose Club youth became competitors in many of the leagues for different sports established in the London area.
you know, when girls used to come to watch us, and, you know, we played the American Air Force, so there was a tall chap, you know, there, you know, so I used to go over to him. He says, look, I'm going to jump with you, but please, there are girls there. I don't want to feel like a fool. Don't jump. Let me jump. You'll still hit the ball, which was true. He did, you know, the jump up, you know. But being small, what I did, I used to foul everybody. So I was slung off every match, I was sent off.
On one occasion, one of my friends came running, said, come quickly. I want to show you something. And we went around there, and there was there were a few men, muscled men, training with weights. I asked the coach whether I could try to lift the weight. So he said, do you know how much is on this weight? I said, yes, it's 140 pounds. So he says, and have you ever lifted the weights before? I said, not weights like this, but I have lifted a lot during the war. I picked the weight up into my shoulders, and I pressed it, and I put it down properly. I said, you really haven't lifted the weight before? I said, no. I attempted to break the British record. I mean, to everybody's surprise, because nobody's ever heard of me, because I never competed with anybody. So everybody around said, who is this boy? Who is this fellow? Melbourne Olympic Games was, to me, the greatest thing that happened to me. So when I marched with the British team, following the other teams, and it was my birthday, I felt so proud that 11 years after I was liberated from the concentration camps, hardly alive, I was not only participating in the Olympic Games, but I was representing my adopted country. But the thing that really moved me, and as I was marching, I kept thinking that, where are my parents? If only they were alive, how proud they would have been of me to be that I have reached that stage.
A particularly memorable figure close to the boys was himself a pre-war German refugee, Dr. Oscar Friedman, a psychologist. He and Yogi Mehr sometimes differed on how to deal with the boys and their horrendous past.
The boys had to go there and see him. And he, being Freudian, he felt they have to talk it off their cell, or whatever you would call it. They have to talk about it, they have to loosen it. And I said, they are not ready for it. They will tell time. Time will ask them the question. You are asking. He said, what do you mean? I said, I see them and they go. It's like going to the dentist. She just don't want to be talking about this and that. Time is not yet right. Time will be right when they are secure.
Their life in London and throughout Britain gave the boys the opportunity to mix with British people and with Jewish society in Britain, to meet a generation that had not been victimized by Nazi persecution. That could sometimes prove distressing.
The sadness for the boys was that when they moved into the wider Jewish society, there were those Jewish families and Jews who did not want to have anything to do with them, and certainly didn't want to hear anything of what they'd been through. There was a tremendous aversion among many British Jews to hearing anything about the camps, and that these youngsters could actually describe these horrors. It was felt they should keep quiet.
We didn't talk about the camps because nobody was interested. They just didn't believe that that was true, what we were telling them.
We felt that people didn't want to hear about it anyway, which now I hear that they felt they couldn't ask because it was too sensitive a question, too painful for us.
We talked among ourselves a lot about it because we had identified with each other, you know, the boys. But with other people outside, there was no interest at all. Maybe we were hiding it. We felt ashamed of it.
If people didn't ask, we didn't talk about it. I certainly never talked about it if I wasn't asked. If somebody asked me, there was no problem for me to talk about it. I never kept it away. But then I was quite happy when people didn't ask me.
Many parents in the Jewish community were not happy about their daughters dating the boys.
Don't forget, they didn't know us. They saw, here's a boy come from the concentration camp. They didn't know our future. They didn't know if we're healthy, if we're sick. Obviously, they didn't want us because they wanted the best for their daughters.
I was going out with a girl. Everything was fine. I was going out with a girl for about 2 years, you know. And so the mother says, "What are you doing? He has no future. He has nothing. What are you marrying?" You know, and so on. You know, so that what happened. So she dumped me. Okay, and well, I found another nicer girl, and I married her, and she's English, and we had the first child was born in England, you know, and then we went to America.
They thought they're not good enough for their daughters, which probably we were not. I don't know, but I don't think my wife can complain after 50 years.
As the boys thrived in England, a crisis welled that affected them all, if not physically, then emotionally. The Jews and Arabs in mandatory Palestine were about to go to war. The British, influenced by Foreign Minister Ernest Bevin, had attempted to restrict Jewish immigration to Palestine. The Arabs rejected statehood and attacked. War began for the establishment of an independent Jewish state, one that could and would also serve as a homeland for refugees from Hitler's camps. In London, the boys participated in public demonstrations in support of the Jewish community in Palestine. Many still dreamt of going to what would become Israel, and some did.
I arrived there. After 3 weeks, I was on the front already. No, as they gave me a rifle, was taller than me.
I did it really as looking for revenge, looking that if we will have our own state, and it was already declared, so at least one thing I'll be able to do, defend myself. This is what I couldn't do while being in the camps in Germany, not even when I was in Poland.
I'm very proud of it, that we got a state today. And at least the Jewish people know there is a place for them if they want to go anywhere, go to a country. They know they're always welcome to the state of Israel.
In 1998, on the occasion of Israel's 50th anniversary as a state, the boys held their annual reunion in Tel Aviv. They met the then president of Israel, Ezer Weizmann. Weizmann's wife, Reuma, had been one of the group leaders in a hostel in the London area. All the boys, wherever they live, have continued to feel an abiding attachment to Israel.
The most wonderful experience to rejoice 50 years of the State of Israel and be here with all our friends.
Who would have thought, after 50 years where we came from, that we will be able to celebrate here in Israel after 50 years? No one gave us, no one ever gave us a chance. It's lovely to be here.
Hello, Mike. How are you? Lovely to see you. Very well. Nice to see you.
In the 60 years since their liberation, the boys have travelled long distances. Almost half stayed and made their lives in Britain. Yet they are spread out all over the world. Even as they meet, the traumas of their childhood underlie their friendships and their bonds.
Honoured guests, ladies and gentlemen, will you please charge your glasses and be upstanding? The toast is the Queen.
standing. The toast is the President and the State of Israel.
All the boys have remained loyal to the Jewish people and appreciative of the State of Israel. Throughout the years, the boys' spirit has been extraordinary. They have a pugnacious pride. They became independent. They took nothing from society. Their own organization, the 45 Aid Society, is itself involved in charity.
They all worked tremendously hard. They all struggled. They had no advantages. I think their main achievement was to have lived normal lives, to have brought up families. They weren't begging. They didn't say, we've been through hell, you owe us something. Support us, be our crutches in life. They made their own way through life, and it is a very remarkable achievement.
We got 3 lovely sons. That is one of the proud things in my life, that I brought up a family and they all grew up to be nice, civilized people.
I don't know why I survived. Who knows? I survived to marry. I survived to have 2 children. Maybe that's why.
My mother said to me, hopefully one will survive and carry on the family. And that was very much aim for me, to show that Hitler didn't win.
I was at very happy times in life and very sad times in my life. But I prefer to think of the happy times.
From Monik Goldberg, I reflect that I could now tell my father that I have not forgotten what I learned from him when I was a young boy. I helped my fellow man when I could. I am proud to be a Jew, for I have seen men behave worse than beasts. But the Jews remembered Rabbi Hillel, who taught us, if you find yourself in a place where there are no men, you must strive to be a man. We boys were among the beasts, and I am proud to declare that we upheld the dignity of man.